Welcome, everybody. This is the San Diego Monastery. So I see a lot of new faces here. So I want to welcome everybody here. Traditionally, we start off with a Vedic chant. So I'm going to go ahead and chant. This is from the Rig Vedas. And if you know the chant, you can chant along. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Maeti Rudra Yatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam Tena Mam Pahi Nityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. O Lord, shine through and through, and ever protect us with thy loving presence. Om, peace, peace, peace to all beings everywhere. So thank you everyone for coming. For those of you who are first timers here, this is the Vedanta Society where we teach the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita, the ancient wisdom of India. And here we talk about how to connect with the divine source. And one of the teachings in the Indian tradition is a saying in Sanskrit, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti, that the truth, the ultimate truth is one. And it's called by various names, and different religions are just different paths leading to that same ultimate truth. So if you look around this place here, you'll see we have a shrine to Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Native American tradition, Taoism, and Sikhism. Some of the more traditional mainstream, and these are like windows, paths, all going to the same ultimate source. And so I think it's so appropriate that today's speaker, Peter Bolland, is going to be speaking about these eternal truths from each of these different the common theme behind all these various religions. So, Peter, today I was sort of last night and today I woke up at 2 a.m. I actually woke up and I was going through this book here. And I was really amazed at how beautifully written it was, just in such simplicity. For those that don't know, Peter is one of our Vedanta friends. He is a teacher, a college professor at Southwestern University, and he teaches religion, comparative religion, Eastern traditions, mythologies, a whole canvas of classes. And he's really done a beautiful job in sort of like putting together, what do these ancient wisdoms teach us? What is wisdom? He begins that with that in the very first chapter of his book. And he really takes us on a journey, like understanding what's the difference between having knowledge and what is wisdom. And just to summarize, basically, as I was understanding, wisdom is embodied knowledge. Saying that in one of our mystic saints, Sri Ramakrishna, used to say that you can study milk, you can see its whiteness, you can think about it, but only the people that drink it and get nourished by it really benefit from it. So someone who studies all of these things, that's great, but that's what we call knowledge. But wisdom is actually drinking into the knowledge, embodying it, and having it transform us. That's wisdom. How does it change our character? How does it change our perception of what we experience, of reality? How does it transform us? So in this book, I think it's such a beautiful, he's going to touch on 7 touchstones. What are 7 common points that these traditions have? And he's going to start off really with this but I think the common thing, almost like a flower, these 7 start with the first one, which is acceptance. And in acceptance, he looks at really like, what are we resistant to when it comes to acceptance? What are our do's, likes, and not likes? And how can we go beyond that into really accepting things as they are? And it's what we struggle with. And he shows in the various traditions, from Christianity to Islam, talking about how Islam talked about the 99, there's 99 ways of talking about God. And in Sufism, the 100th way is silence. And you start to see that there's a common theme, maybe of silence that is reaching out to us, embodied silence. It's teaching us. There's a saying that I've heard that silence between 2 strangers can seem very annoying, can seem very difficult, but silence between 2 people who are intimate, 2 friends, can deepen the relationship. He takes us on this first, like a flower unfurling of acceptance, and then he takes us to the second petals unrolling, which I believe is surrender. And how do we deepen into this, all these, so you'll hear 7 different touchstones. And he really does a fantastic job, I think, in really taking the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Bible, and just putting it all together in such a beautiful book. It's really wonderful, Peter. I got to tell you, I just started and I just, went for about 3 hours. I took it to the gym with me also as I was doing my Stairmasters, but it was just, I had a whole series of notes. My computer's not working today, but I think it's such a beautiful book. And so, Peter, we're very honored. I think this is something that symbolizes from what your talks are, encapsulates the essence. And one of the things that you're going to find out about Peter, the last touchstone, I believe, is integration. And one of the things I find Peter does beautifully is he integrates. He's such humility when it comes to the different traditions, when it comes to learning. There's a definition about humility by one of our swamis. It says, humility is the ability to see greatness in others. Humility is the ability to see greatness in others. And I think that's what Peter does. So, Peter, thank you so much for coming today and sharing with us this journey of the 7-stone path. And we hope today to do is Peter will do his presentation, and then we'd like to get into a little bit of engagement. We have some people from our chaplain, I'm studying to be a chaplain, and we have some of our chaplains here are from also different traditions. And so I'd like to get into some discussion, engagement into things that you find click with you, and even things that you don't find that don't click with you. And how can we make sense of these things? All right. So let's just give a little hand for it. Here's Peter.
Can I borrow your book,
Yeah,
by the way? This book sounds amazing. Swami, you are the most loving man, and that is such a beautiful, I've never heard my book talked about quite that way before. Could you just go on a little longer? No. Now, I appreciate so much being asked to come into this space and to share some really basically an overview of this book and what each of the core themes are, and also a little bit about the writing process. I know a lot of you have a book in you and would like to maybe think about how do you get a book out of here and onto paper. And having gone through the process, I'm not some expert writing coach now, but I can tell you a little bit about how I did it, and maybe I'll share a little bit about that as well. I wanted to just show you this very first slide here. This is a little altar or shrine that I have in my home. It's in right when you come in the front door. Is it foyer or foyer? It's both, right? Yeah, okay. But anyway, and when I got these books from the publisher, you know, all these boxes arrived on my front porch, and I tore it open and held it in my hands. It had been a Word doc in my computer for 14 years, and now it was a book. And I was like, you know, and of course I sat down and read it as if I'd never seen it before. And I have a few of them scattered around the house. I bought these little plastic stands that hold them up. There's a few in the other room. I live in a bookstore now, and there's more truth to that than you know. I sometimes joke, I used to be an author and now I'm a book salesman. There's a whole bunch of them on a table out there, and I might as well get this part over with. They're $24.99 on Amazon, but today only for this special event, $20. I'll cover the sales tax. The hardcovers are in there. Those are $48 on Amazon. We're doing those today for $30. It's like the fair. You know, but wait, there's more. No, there's not more. Actually, there is more. There's also a 26-page free study guide. One of the most thrilling things that happened since the book came out last September was some people are emailing me and saying, hey, we bought 15 copies on Amazon. We're doing a book club in my house. We're reading the book and we're putting together study guide questions. Do you have any resources that could help us do that? And I went, So over Christmas break, I wrote a study guide to the book. It's free. Y'all can go get it on my website. It's a downloadable PDF, peterbolland.com, and it's right there. It's called the 7 Stone Workbook. So that's an extra piece to help folks move through the book. But back to my altar here, I wanted to share with you a couple of pieces besides my singing bowls and other things. This wooden chest that you can't quite see, but just the surface of, that is a beautifully, intricately carved chest made by my maternal grandfather, Anton van Niel, my mom's dad, back in the Netherlands, where my whole family is from. And that was, as I said, he made that about 100 years ago. And I grew up with that piece of furniture in my childhood home. And my mom and dad have both passed on. And so the 3 brothers divided up about 10 of those beautiful pieces. So that's a nice touchstone for me to kind of put the work on top of his chest. And then on the left of the image, you see an oval wooden platter leaning up against the wall. That is a beautiful platter of inlaid wood and some metal touches. And that was made by my paternal grandfather, Johannes Bolland, my dad's dad, while he was a political prisoner in a Nazi camp called Buchenwald. Some of you know, a very notorious Nazi camp, not an extermination camp like Dachau or Auschwitz, but a camp where the Nazis, when they occupied all of Europe, including the Netherlands, they rounded up people who they thought might be a threat to their new regime, including elementary school principals, of all things. So my grandfather, being a school teacher and a principal, was viewed as a threat by these fascists who took him and enslaved him in a camp called Buchenwald for 4 years, from 41 to 45. He returned from that experience lame from torture. And I still have all of his intake paperwork with the swastikas on it. It's just a chilling reminder to me every time I leave my house and come back into my house, that fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, anti-intellectualism, anti-freedom forces are obviously always with us. And as you know, if you follow the news, there is a vibrant wave of these kinds of movements happening in countries all over the world, including right here. And so none of that was in my mind when I wrote the book, but now that I have it, I see, like, boy, if fascists take over here, they're coming for Swami and they're coming for me, and they're coming for some of you. Anybody who teaches freedom of thought, spirituality, inquiry, diversity of thought, that it's important to question all doctrines, all dogmas, all authorities, that is a threatening stance to take in the world. So all of that is in the book. There's no politics in the book. There's no Nazis, but I just wanted to mention all that. And then it was with some chagrin that I noticed that this little statue of the Buddha, who's about this tall, you see he's got a little swastika on his chest. Yes. And a lot of you, because this is an educated group, you all understand that that is not a German Nazi symbol. They appropriated that from ancient ancient Buddhist and Indian and Nepalese iconography, and has a lot of beautiful ancient spiritual significance. So no, that is not Nazi Buddha. That is just another reminder of the circular nature of all of these terrific, go ahead and change please, all of these terrific pieces. So why I wrote the book. This project was born many years ago, as you heard Swami mention. I've been a professor of comparative religion and mythology and philosophy for actually 33 years now. I can't believe it. And I've been in college classrooms, and I'm so grateful I get to come into places like this and all kinds of spiritual communities and lifelong learning centers, and talk about all of these wonderful traditions, what Aldous Huxley calls the perennial philosophy, which connects right back to that Rig Veda passage that Swami mentioned at the top, that the truth is one, but the sages call it by many names. And so it's always been a personal passion of mine when I fell in love with religious studies in college to go looking for those universal archetypal ideas that well up in all these disparate cultures. And so that was the project, and there's a personal reason too. I came to philosophy and religious studies with a lot of need of healing. That to me, studying philosophy, well, let me say it better. To me, religion, philosophy, and spirituality are healing modalities. They are medicines that help me feel, in Jungian terms, less fragmented, that help me integrate the disparate parts of myself, help me feel more at home in my own skin, help me feel more present in my relationships, help me feel more at peace with the cosmos and all of its paradoxes. So that's why I fell in love with wisdom traditions. It was therapy for me. It was a healing modality, and I feel that same longing in my students who look at me from the classroom with a kind of a hollow fear in their eyes, many of them, and a sense of confusion about not knowing what's next, about feeling powerless, about being surrounded by contradictory, powerful forces, and the apathy that sometimes generates, and the nihilism, the oh, why bother kind of I'm just going to check out thing that happens to a lot of people in their 20s, and that really drove the urgency of the project deeper and deeper into me. And so people sometimes think that philosophy is supposed to answer all of your questions, that if a religion is worth anything, it answers all your questions. And I understand that longing. Who doesn't want to come out of confusion and into clarity? But what continuously strikes me, and I think is so vivifying, life-giving, is that when we really dive into these traditions, it's not answers we often receive. It is serenity in the face of mystery, clarity in the face of questions. And that changes the whole game. And so philosophy helps us ask better questions and helps us have peace. So that gets a basic overview. And as you heard Swami mention, the first couple of stones, it kind of occurred to me about 15 years ago, maybe I could write a book that looks across all these traditions, all these wonderful wisdom traditions, and just creates a list of 7 key teachings, 7 key ideas. I didn't want to get lost in the jargon. I didn't want to get lost in the doctrine. I didn't want to bog down in ideological descriptions. I wanted to just say, what are 7 key principles that I seem to find wherever I go in these wisdom traditions, the core teaching of acceptance, of wisdom as surrender, of wisdom as engagement, of allowance, of enjoyment, of love, of integration. So I thought, maybe I could just build a chapter around each one of these core ideas. And as I'm writing about acceptance, go looking through different traditions, brief passages, quotes, ideas, and so on. So that sort of gave the book its structure. was this sort of central image of a stepping stone across a creek or something. Here's these 7 stones. You need to walk the first one to get to the second one, to get to the third one. So there is a sense of sequence, but as we'll see, that's all gonna collapse a little bit. And that's actually a photo of the first time I finished the first draft. I printed it on my printer. Terrible waste of ink and paper, but I had to see the darn thing in real life. And I mocked up a cover. I put 7 rocks in the front lawn, took a picture, and I'm like, okay, maybe that's kind of the book now looks like this, as you know, but okay, next slide, please. So why don't we think about what those 7 ideas are, but first a little thought about, go ahead and put them all up here. These are animated, just fire them all off. So, how to use this book. This is what I think this book is. It's not an academic textbook. It's not a scholarly book, but it has a lot of information in it. I intend the book to be for regular folks like us who have never studied philosophy or religion before. And it's also for people who have an interest in those things and want to see it in a new light. And so each idea, each chapter then is part of a process. And each chapter closes with a section called A Wise Person, which is kind of a summary. So for example, at the end of the first chapter on acceptance, there's just this 2-page list of a wise person does this, a wise person does that. I wanted to describe, again, what acceptance would look like if it were embodied in a life, in a person. And so instead of trying to describe what acceptance is, why don't we try to describe what a person would be like if they were practicing this kind of deep acceptance? So maybe it's my teacher side, to have a chapter summary at the end of the chapter, but it kind of serves that role of very simply sort of checking off the key ideas of each chapter now in this brief passage. And then finally, each chapter ends with a closing meditation. Now, I know you cannot meditate while you are reading. So this is a little bit of a, it'd be nice if I had a few $1,000 more, I would go into a studio and make an audiobook version, and then you could truly sit there and listen to it. But I want to tell you, I got an email from a reader who said, Peter, I love the closing meditation sections. What I do is I just pull out my phone, I open a voice memo, and I read the closing meditation into a voice memo. Then I press play and sit back and I lead myself through a meditation. So that's another way. We all know that real meditation is silence. No one's even guiding you through it. But there are many meanings of the word meditation, and I intend these final passages of each chapter to be an opportunity to not analytically, intellectually, conceptually think about the ideas of the chapter, but again, to allow those ideas to sink down into embodiment, internalization. So let me sketch briefly each section of the book. Yeah, that's an ad I put into a magazine for a couple of months. That's the other thing about, for all of us creators who are musicians or writers, I think most of my fellow creators love the creating, hate the marketing. And it's just one of those things where, look, if you want readers, you've got to tell them that you wrote a book. And you're gonna need to budget for that. And you're gonna need to do social media. I spent the last 20 years, I started on MySpace, and then when Facebook came along, I jumped onto that. And I've built up 10,000 followers, and I have a YouTube channel with 300,000 viewers. And not because I'm interested in self-aggrandizement. It's not that I am without ego or ambition, but I'm not in it for the fame. I was building what we call in the nonfiction publishing world a platform, so that when the book came out, I could tweet about it. Well, I'm not on Twitter anymore. I jumped off, but I could do Facebook and YouTube videos about it, and suddenly a bunch of people know about my book that wouldn't have otherwise known. Because when I was shopping at writers' conferences years ago, the first thing every nonfiction publisher and agent will ask you is not tell me about your book, it's what is your platform? How big are you? How many followers do you have? Because if my name were Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I'd have people fighting to publish my book. But I'm Joe Nobody. And why should a publishing company commit, right? Unless they know they're going to at least move a couple of books. So anyway, I don't care for this, but I wanted to show that to you. These are some of the weird things you have to do. So the first section is the introduction, and as Swami mentioned, it's sort of some house cleaning. It's like, what is wisdom? And how is it different from knowledge? And why do we long for it? And how do we get it? So I find in a lot of wisdom traditions, a lot of sources, this central idea that wisdom begins in an admission of ignorance, in saying, I don't know. And the Socrates story in Plato's philosophy is sort of our Western civilization archetype of that. And there are many other examples from Lao Tzu and from Confucius and all kinds of other sources. Nisargadatta Maharaj's wonderful collection of teachings, I Am That. You know, all of these voices affirm this basic starting point, that you can't even begin to acquire wisdom until you approach the altar, so to speak, in complete admission of ignorance. Because if you think you know everything, then you're closed off and nothing new can get in. And then we got to that piece about wisdom being different from knowledge in that sense. And I think you put it very beautifully at the top, Swami, that maybe wisdom simply means embodied knowing. And I love the example you used of milk. That's a classic one. And I wish I had thought of that. I would have put it in the first chapter, but I didn't do that. But that idea of knowledge is something you know, wisdom is something you are. Wisdom is a way of being in the world. And perhaps even one could be considered wise and not know very much stuff. And conversely, one could know everything and be terribly unwise. So this introduction invites you into a dialogue about that and trying to come to some clarity about that. So then we jump into the first chapter, the first stone, wisdom as acceptance. And yes, I thought that the whole process had to start here. And as we all know, Buddha taught powerfully about this condition of consciousness in which one does not resist what is. And the idea that suffering comes from resisting what is. And that same idea comes from the Roman philosophers, the Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, who counsel us that the first step toward wisdom is understand that there are some things over which you have control, and there are other things over which you have no control, and kind of get those two lists sorted out. And by the way, the things I can't control, that's a much longer list than the things I can control. In fact, let's go ahead and put everything on the list of stuff I can't control, except my own thoughts, my own reactions. I can't control the weather. I don't control other people, traffic, etc. To put it very colloquially, just simply remove the word should from your vocabulary. Instead of getting to the front of the checkout counters in Target and having all these long lines, or having two long lines and then a bunch of empty cash registers and saying, they should get another checker up here. Or taking the next step and yelling at the manager, you need to open more check stands. The word should is an interesting word. It basically asserts that you are the manager of the cosmos. They should fill all these potholes. And that you spend your life in kind of constant judgment and project onto the reality that you find yourself in a fantasy of how you think reality really should be. And what a recipe for turmoil and agitation and anger and resentment that is, instead of this simple renunciation of attachment to expectations. I think that curious book, A Course on Miracles, puts it this way, that all suffering is caused by unmet expectations, which is Buddhism 101. That life is suffering and suffering is caused by craving. And the third noble truth is, if you want to suffer less, have fewer expectations and demands and cravings, and accept things as they are, and then get to work. So acceptance is a sort of starting point. Go ahead and go to the next. And then out of that starting point, the second stone becomes possible. Wisdom as surrender. So I think the chapter starts out something like, acceptance is acknowledging there's a river. Surrender means falling in. So surrender is a deeper acceptance of acceptance, and a stance of really letting go of all of the fight, all of the resistance to what is. And then, of course, the question becomes, well, what are we surrendering to? Because the language of surrender in our normal, ordinary way of thinking is one of defeat. Surrender is a failure. You're supposed to win. You're supposed to conquer. And so to surrender sounds like I'm giving up. So it took some doing in this chapter to try it anyway, to reframe surrender as a very powerful affirmative step in the right direction. And that question, that second bullet point, what are we surrendering to? That was a perfect time for me to put a pretty long section in there about what is God, in all of the different senses of that word, from a number of different traditions and a number of different levels. Because a lot of people who have devotional lives in whatever tradition they are practicing think of surrendering as surrendering to their higher power. And so we wanted to kind of think of what that is in as inclusive a way as possible. I don't want to throw atheists out of the book already in chapter 2. And so we really wanted to be as carefully as possible discern a wide variety of ways of thinking about God. Joseph Campbell's ideas that all God ideas are masks, and the mystery behind the mask is not the mask. And that's where we get to talk then about non-theistic traditions like Taoism, like some parts of Vedanta, especially in the Advaita sort of flavor, and all the possibilities that come out of that. Is ultimate reality a transcendent force, or is it an immanent force? And the answer is, of course, yes. And that's the integration from the last chapter. But in an attempt to kind of think about surrender as a powerful stance, I jumped to a nature parable, a nature metaphor about giant sequoias. And it's from an experience I had the last time Lori and I were in Yosemite. So the book is not a memoir, and it's not a bunch of essays about nature mysticism. But once in a while, I have to jump into some of that to sort of bring to life, I hope, this idea of surrender. So this is a brief passage called Giant Sequoia. A few years ago, my wife Lori and I celebrated our 25th anniversary at the Wawona Hotel in Yosemite National Park, the site of our honeymoon. 7 miles to the south of Wawona, there is an ancient grove of sequoias called the Mariposa Grove. And walking among the giant redwoods on a cold late spring morning, the ground spongy and damp, the low-hanging clouds torn by shards of icy wind, revealing ribbons of blue sky above, you feel in your bones the deep silence of the forest and the immeasurable patience of the sequoias, the largest, oldest living things on earth. Some of these trees are 3,000 years old. They have withstood 3,000 winters, 3,000 fire seasons, and just recently, the coming of industrial man, a myopic creature with an overblown ego and a penchant for clear cutting. Fortunately, Galen Clark, John Muir, and others worked tirelessly to preserve tiny islands of wilderness called national parks, where nature is allowed to exist unmolested by the hands of rapacious commerce. And as we walked through an ever-changing array of rain, hail, and sun showers, the trail climbed over a ridge and dropped into a meadow ringed round with snow. And through the center of the meadow ran a winding creek of snowmelt, one lone sequoia, its bark glowing red in the diffuse light, rose up out of the earth like a colossus. It stopped us in our tracks. Out of the silence, a stellar jay squawked high in the canopy. Far from breaking the spell, his cry only deepened it, like the penetrating peal of a gong in a temple. Here this tree has stood in this meadow since the time of the pharaohs, 1,000 years before Christ. Throughout all of the agonizing and glorious centuries of human history, this beautiful tree has stood in perfect, absolute surrender. You'd be hard-pressed to find a grander, bolder, or more obvious display of power than this. And yet on this cold gray morning, I was struck not by its might or mass, but by its humility. Its entire existence was characterized by a complete and utter surrender. 3,000 years ago, when it was merely a seedling, as it felt its roots sink deep into the forest floor and its tiny limbs unfurl toward the sky, it knew that this was where it was going to live. In this meadow, in these mountains, with these sister trees. It did not long for some other life. It did not yearn to be anything other than what it was. It knew instinctively that its highest honor was to be itself. It knew that its very existence was a prayer, and that every day for thousands of years, it would stand as a testament to life and the sacred source of life beyond all the veils of duality. And all of these thoughts swept through me in an instant. And as a gust of wind knocks snow off high branches, this awareness tore away from me my smallness, my weariness, my restlessness to be someone other than who I am. Deeply rooted in the earth, reaching into the sky, silent and still, feeling every breath of wind, washed clean by the rain, shining in the sun, this tree stood before me like a vast and silent force. Its selfless humility and unabashed authenticity gave me to myself. I surrendered. You can feel it, can't you, in a piece like that? I'm trying to talk myself into something. I sometimes sound like a preacher when I get into that tone, but trust me, I'm the one I'm trying to convince. And so there's a sense of surrender even in that, to allow myself to even absorb these ideas in that way. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the third stone is called wisdom as engagement. And now having accepted and having surrendered, we have to get to work, right? We have to jump into action. And so action is necessary because we are creatures in a world of action. And therefore, we must act. We have to eat every day. We need a place to live. We must compete in the marketplace and work for our daily bread, and in some way offer something of ourselves in service in that exchange of life that all life is. So that's engagement or action. But the question becomes, what kind of action is right action? What are the best kinds of actions? So as we know, karma means action or activity in Sanskrit. And so this is a key theme in Vedanta and throughout the Hindu paths. And the Bhagavad Gita is arguably an entire treatise on right action and engagement in the field in the metaphorical field of the battlefield, which this is. And so the counsel from Krishna in the Gita immediately to Arjuna is, you must act, but here's how you should do it. Act without attachment to the phala, to the fruits of action. Don't act because you're attached to outcomes. Act because it is your dharma, your duty, to offer the talents that you have been given in the service of the cosmos, just as everything else is offering the talents embedded in it, in the service of the cosmos. That is our mission, it seems to me, is one of Krishna's many messages in the Gita. And the way to get it wrong is to work with attachment to the results. When you perform the work of your dharma, Krishna says in chapter 3 of the Gita, that's not you doing the action, you are doing the work of Brahman. So you are a vessel through which Brahman is working when you work in accord with your dharma, when you work without attachment. But when you work with attachment, it destroys the whole process from the inside. So I want to throw myself under the bus here and read a little passage about how I got it wrong once, and maybe you'll see yourself in this as well. It's called The Owl and the Fisherman. So that's a beautiful barn owl. Perhaps you've been fortunate enough to see them flying around at night. A beautiful white kind of ghost kind of goes across the neighborhood. Amazing owls. So here's another memoir passage called The Owl and the Fisherman, about how action with attachment is so destructive. It kind of reminds me of the last passage. Lori and I live near a lake. It's Lori and I walking again. A lot happens on walks, I realize. Lori and I live near a lake. We live out by Lake Murray. An unusual occurrence in Southern California. And we often walk along the lake shore with our dog. And one day we saw a beautiful barn owl hanging upside down from a tree. Its ghostly white wings extended, its feet hopelessly tangled in fishing line. Who knows how long it had hung there struggling before it died. It was a wrenching sight, knowing that this magnificent bird of prey had died a slow, meaningless death from dehydration, exhaustion, and shock. You only have to see this once. From that moment on, you pick up every single wad of abandoned fishing line you find along the shore. One day, as I gathered tangled strands of discarded fishing line and other assorted trash from the lake shore, I grew increasingly angry. How can people be so thoughtless, so cruel, so stupid? Leaving behind fast food trash and beer cans is one thing, but fishing line? These people are unconscionable murderers, I thought. Before I knew it, my anger had turned into self-righteousness. An unmistakable sense of superiority surged through me, because I was picking up their trash and saving the lives of innocent wild animals. I was better than these low consciousness litterers, or so I thought. In the time it took for me to draw one breath, all these thoughts coursed through me like a flood, washing away my good intentions and what little compassion I had left. I had to laugh. In an instant, my simple act of service had morphed into a self-serving ego trip. The ego rarely misses an opportunity to bend reality toward its needs. And with the cunning swiftness of a barn owl in the dark, my ego had silently and without warning swooped in and turned a simple act of selfless service into a celebration of self-importance. For me to be right, someone else had to be wrong. The consciousness of anger and resentment, no matter how regally dressed, drives a dagger into the heart of compassion and kindness. The only cure is humility. I quickly found my equilibrium as the gospel line came to mind, "Forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." What we call evil is always rooted in ignorance and self-absorption. The people who littered the lakeshore were guilty of one simple failing: unconsciousness, a crime I had committed innumerable times. They were so caught up in their own small sense of self that they were unconscious of the impact their actions would have on others, and resenting them only destroyed my own equilibrium. And as I gathered fishing line on the shore that day, I was working for my own profit, fueling my sense of self-importance and healing my deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and imperfection. By feeling superior to others, I could momentarily drown out my disappointment in my own numerous shortcomings. I'm revealing way too much here. I feel like I'm in therapy. I feel like I'm naked. Do I still have my clothes on? Okay, good. Let me go on. Once I recognized this pathological shift, I was able to let go of it and move back into the far happier state of mind that simply and humbly performs works of service for the welfare of the world without any egoic attachments. I didn't have to make them wrong because I no longer needed to be right. Because in the end, I'm just like those littering fishermen. I bring all my imperfections and unconsciousness with me wherever I go, and I leave a trail of debris of one kind or another in my wake. We are all tangled in the invisible binds of ego, but in the simplicity of selfless service, karma yoga, to put it in Sanskrit, in the simplicity of selfless service, clarity replaces the murky clutter of unconsciousness, leaving us edified and grounded in the awareness that we are neither less than nor more than anyone else, a truth both humbling and exalting. Go ahead and go. Next slide, please. By the way, I still pick up fishing line every day, and I go through this every day. Having this realization that I just shared in this chapter doesn't mean I'm fixed. And the work is renewed every time I bend down to pick up fishing line. And I carry a knife with me now because I often have to wade out into the lake in my jeans to grab a coot or a mallard duck, or one time a Canada goose. That's a lot of bird to wrestle with, and cut the fishing line off of their body with my knife. And believe me, I'm thinking some thoughts about the SOBs that left this stuff on the beach. And then I remember this chapter. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm that wisdom teacher guy who wrote this chapter about transcending selflessness. So again, read passages like that as aspirational, not as evidence of my ascendancy into some kind of spiritual plane not known by most mortals. Trust me, that ain't happening. So here we have Gandhi, such a towering figure of the 20th century, an imperfect person just like all of us. But I chose this image toward the end of his life. They're working on his commune with his spinning wheel, sort of the image of self-sufficiency and freedom from colonial rule, and cottage industries helping India regain its autonomy after a century and a half of British imperialistic control. So all of that, every time you think of Gandhi, you think of all of those pieces. But wisdom as allowance, this is further thinking about right action. So after thinking about wisdom as engagement, as we did in the previous chapter, now we're adding another element to our thinking about right action. And I landed on this word allowance, even though it's problematic, because for many of us, when you hear the word allowance, you think of your mom giving you a quarter every week when you were a kid or something. I don't know what it is now, 20 bucks a week. Who knows what kids get now? A debit card, so depending on your class and what decade you're talking about, but that's not what this chapter is about. This is not about getting money from your dad. This is allowing things to happen. And so it's a kind of action that I have to jump to Taoism in this chapter right away, because that's where we get the most powerful exposition of this idea from the Tao Te Ching, from Zhuangzi, the great Taoist masters of the 6th, 5th, 4th, and 3rd century of ancient China. This idea of Wu Wei, which means literally non-action, but is probably better translated as a kind of creative letting be. It's deep engagement in the field of action without trying to control anything. It is action that is intuitive, perceptive, and in harmony with what is already unfolding. You know, I talk a bit about surfing from time to time in the book. It's just part of my experience growing up in Ventura, California. That's what we all grew up doing. And when a surfer paddles out into the waves to go surfing, she is not imposing her will on the ocean. There are these energy waves moving through the liquid medium of water, and the discernment of the surfer, she has to stand on the shore, figure out where to go, paddle very vigorously to get out there, turn toward the coast, and then be in the right spot in a literally fluid field with no landmarks. It takes a lot of discernment. One of the hardest things to learn as a surfer is not just standing on your board, it's where to be in the water so that the wave isn't either broken over your back or hasn't swelled up enough for you to paddle with it and ride it. So you paddle in the direction with the wave until the wave and your board are the same speed. And it is a perfect metaphor for working with the energies that are already moving around us. Now, we're not talking about surfing. We're talking about how do you navigate your marriage, your relationships with the rest of your family, with your children, with your parents, with your friends, with your colleagues, with traffic, with your own emotional storm system. How do we practice minimal effort with maximum outcome? Which is, by the way, what nature does all the time. And that's what the great Taoist voices do, is remind us through endless nature metaphors, kind of like the surfing one, that the best form of action is action that works in accord with what is already unfolding. That's what that passage on 128 and 129 is essentially about. This chapter also is a nice chance for us to start thinking about faith in all of the different things that means, religious experience, and also prayer and meditation, which are practiced all over the world in all kinds of different traditions as ways of moving into accord with what is already unfolding. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Then with acceptance, surrender, engagement, and allowance behind us, we turn to this observation that if I could accept current conditions better, if I could surrender to them, if I could practice careful discernment in my engagement, if I could move into deeper cooperation or allowance with the forces around me, guess what? I would start enjoying my life more. Because a lot of my resentment and resistance is going to kind of fall away, or at least grow smaller. And I would start relaxing more and being able to be more present. And so I wanted to explore in this chapter joy. And I tried to avoid the word happiness, although we have to kind of talk about that a little bit at the beginning of the chapter. But happiness, enjoyment, joy, all those kinds of things are really worth thinking about, because philosophy has a bad reputation as being just, really serious and talking about difficult things. And so, what about laughing? What about unbridled enjoyment of things? That is part of this process as well. That when we embody those things, we start to experience more joy. The four aims of life in Hinduism: kama, artha, dharma, moksha. Kama means pleasure, of course. And why not, especially in a non-dualistic system? If everything is the embodiment of divinity, then clearly enjoying the beauty of the world and the pleasure of an awesome bowl of soup and great music and a nice neck rub and a stunning sunset and a field of stars on a cold winter night. When you feel the joy of those things, I saw a double rainbow outside my office window the other day, and I ran out in the driveway and started taking pictures of it. And that reminded me of the double rainbow video, which some of you know about on YouTube. It's up to 51 million views. This guy back in 2010, there was a double rainbow and he started to video it, and it's now this legendary online viral video because he literally begins weeping in ecstasy about the beauty of a double rainbow. And part of us kind of wants to laugh at him for being so over the top, and part of us, the hair on our arms is standing up because we know exactly what he's in a very vulnerable way expressing. So your homework is to go on YouTube and search double rainbow, and it'll come right up. So that business of making peace with the material, with the material world. Let me read one last piece for you, and then we'll think about these last two sections briefly. And then we'll move into some questions. If any of you have any questions about any of these ideas or about the writing process. So another travel memoir from when Lori and I were on a walk. I realize there's a real theme going here, but go ahead and go to the next slide, please. It's a better picture of that strawberry there. So this is a passage called Wild Strawberries. We came out of the trees and stood on the meadow that sloped down to the gravel beach where the boats were waiting. The boats that would take us across Chilkat Inlet and back to Skagway. We had spent the morning hiking through fragrant conifers and canoeing across a glacial lake to stand on the cusp of Davidson Glacier in the heart of the Tongass National Forest. Our hearts and eyes were full of the raw power of the Alaskan wilderness. We felt expanded, stronger, and more alive. Fields of bright pink fireweed as far as the eye could see, distant mountains capped in mist, old growth forests of spruce and fir, and underfoot soft moss and a chaos of grasses like walking on clouds. Then we saw them. Wild strawberries, deep red and small. That strawberry is about this big. Deep red and small. Their floral perfume turning the air to candy, every breath dessert. Our guide heard our unspoken question. Go ahead, he said. He only had to say it once. Here in the land where glaciers grind granite into dust, so fine the rivers run milky gray, where 800-pound bears and 1,200-pound moose tamped down the paths where we walked. It was difficult to understand how something as fragile and delicate as a wild strawberry could exist. How could this rugged earth exude such beauty? Kneeling in the meadow, plucking one and then another, the sweetness freed me of the need to understand. To this day, I'm hushed into reverence whenever I think back on that moment. It's hard to believe how beautiful the world is sometimes, how generous, how abundant, and how miraculous. There on that patch of Alaskan wilderness, I kneeled in the middle of something sacred, at once ordinary and sublime. When I finally looked up, I was alone. Everyone had gone ahead to board the boats that would take us north to Skagway. Hurrying down to the shore, the taste of strawberries warm on my tongue, I knew that I would never set foot in this meadow again, that this moment was slipping away. I felt in my bones the sweet sadness that always comes with the wisdom of enjoyment, as the Japanese poet Basho so beautifully captured it. Even in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo's cry, I long for Kyoto. I took with me the knowing that the ability to enjoy one's life has nothing to do with exotic locales or extraordinary experiences. You can break open anywhere. Every moment holds in its core a miracle, its wild strawberry. It is not a new world we need, but new eyes with which to see the world. Enjoyment is not an endpoint that comes only after a long process of craving, cleverness, travel, or acquisition. It is a natural byproduct of a well-lived life rooted in broken open awareness. When we see the boundless beauty within every moment, we taste the sweetness of the joy that is our birthright, a joy that is the marrow of life. Not something earned, not something achieved, but something received, like grace. Learning to take the time to slow down and open our eyes, this is the wisdom of enjoyment. Yeah, I got on my knees. I held my camera about that far away from the strawberry to get that picture. I ate that strawberry as soon as I took the picture, just so you know. Next slide, please. We'll take a quick look at these next two. Go ahead and click all those bullet points on if you wouldn't mind. That's a picture of my old dog, Boone. I'm not going to read the passage on this slide because I read it once at an event like this, and by the time I got done with it's a euthanasia story about me putting that dog down. And by the time I got done with it, the whole place was crying, and there were no Kleenex boxes under the chairs. And so a woman wrote me later and said, "Man, you can never read that passage in public again," because it triggered a lot for a lot of us. A lot of us have driven here to this event from hospice where our partner is dying, etc. So I want to be careful about trafficking sometimes in really, really heavy emotions. But letting go at that level, you know, when we decided to put this dog down, euthanasia, well, let me say it this way. My dog was already dying. Death was happening. So I didn't kill my dog. I simply offered some comfort to a dear friend. And so that's one of the last stories in the chapter. But this basic exploration of love, what are the different kinds of love? We turn to ancient Greece, you know, eros, storge, philia, agape. It's other languages like Sanskrit have lots of words for the different kinds of love, but in English we just have love. So you end up saying weird things like, "I really love mashed potatoes and gravy," and "I love you," and it's like, those don't sound like even analogous experiences. And so that required some exploring. And the idea from Confucius, is love a feeling that comes from the heart, or can I build and can I willfully choose to love and be compassionate? And that's the Greek word agape. Clearly, many traditions say that's exactly how it works. You don't wait for love to come over you like a viral infection. You, as Confucius argues, not only choose it with your will, but you implement it with ritual and action. Like writing a handwritten thank you note, which is not an entirely lost art in this digital world. It's one thing to get a text from somebody, "Hey, thank you." It's another for them to in their mailbox, get a piece of paper that you've handwritten and signed your name to. And so those are rituals, or in Confucian philosophy, he calls that li, and it means ritual, decorum, propriety. So it's another thing that I like thinking about, because in the contemporary world, we've sort of lost so many of our binding rituals. And what have we lost as a result? So go ahead and let's go to the last slide, number 7. So as Swami already intimated, this is the chapter where I try to tie everything together with those 6 stones now in place. We have to think about this, that truth comes to us in paradox, that 2 opposite sentences can both be true. Very, very briefly, for example, isn't it true that your life, as you sit there right now, your life is a product of choices that you have made? Who you choose to marry or not marry, or divorce or not divorce, or not marry at all, or whether you chose to have children or not, or what city or country you decided to move to, and whether you went to college or not, what you majored. It seems like you have a lot of freedom and a lot of those choices were monumentally important in shaping the quality of your life right now. So it seems fairly evident that it's safe to say our life is a product of our choices. So that's one truth. But there's another truth, isn't there? That says most of the qualities of my life I did not choose. I did not choose my gender, my sexuality, how tall I was. I would like my hair back, but I was not consulted. I didn't choose my mom and dad. I didn't choose my brothers. I didn't choose the kids on my street that I grew up with. If I'd have been born in Indiana, we all would have grown up deer hunting. We all have rifles and we know how to butcher a buck. I don't own a gun. I grew up in Ventura. We all went surfing and played guitar. We all were in garage bands. So I learned how to be a rock and roll musician. I can't read music. And so I didn't choose that as much as that's the field in which I was planted, and I just sort of grew up there. So, I every room I walk into, I'm a straight, cisgender, tall, white, native English speaking man. And so not only am I asked in the grocery store by total strangers to get that can off the top shelf for them, but every job interview I've ever walked into, I had an unearned advantage. When I walk onto a car lot to get a car, the car dealers are going to give me a lower loan rate than they're going to give an African-American man, let alone a woman. And these are the structural unconscious racisms and sexisms that are in all of our unexamined prejudices. And so I know that's a huge can of worms to open up, but that's I think a really important way of realizing that yes, my life is a product of my choices, but most of the aspects of my life were deeply influenced by things I did not choose. And so that's the thesis and the antithesis. That's paradox. Two truths that are both true, that are the opposite of each other. And so we have to get to the third moment, which is the synthesis. A third truth statement that takes up the partial truths of the thesis and antithesis into a new and hopefully more accurate statement, namely, our lives are the products of fate and choice, which is more true than those earlier statements. And so to recognize the whole history of philosophy is a dialogue like that. Plato says the forms are up there, and Aristotle says, no, the forms are down here. Rationalism and empiricism. That's a dialectic. That's a thesis antithesis. God is transcendent. No, God is immanent. That's a thesis antithesis. And so in all wisdom traditions, there is this movement, this very dynamic movement toward increasing integration. And that's what this chapter is largely about, and the fundamental dangers of stopping with one truth statement and saying, this is it. All the other truth statements are wrong. The perils of fundamentalism. And so go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll start wrapping up here. Yeah, I was debating about whether or not to use this picture. It's not a very flattering picture. And yes, I have pants on. Somebody asked me, did you write your book naked? I'm like, no, but that's a good gimmick. I should say I did, and then maybe I'd sell more books. I don't know. But let me tell you a little bit about this picture. I was digging through my archives, and I found a photo from July 2009. This is literally the day I started writing the book. And it was a very, very hot day in July. And I live toward East County. And that was before we had solar power. So air conditioning the house costs like $700 a month. So I couldn't afford that. So I just let the house be hot all day. And I get a bandana and I soak it with cold water, put it on my head. walk around like a Hell's Angel all day and just work without a shirt. And what you see behind me are a bunch of large cardstock paper. And I put out 8 of them, one for the introduction, one for chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So each of these became like a way of organizing the chapter a little bit. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So this, I know you can't read these, but this is all 8 of those cards. Again, they're about this big. They're like posters. And this was a way of me organizing the work. Let me step out here. So in the center, you see introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2, and then I start like at 1 o'clock and just go around the circle like, oh, this is where the chapter should start, and then this, and then this. And then and I just circled these key ideas, and then I started drawing lines between them to connect how they went together. Someone later told me that this is actually a thing. It's called mind mapping. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't invent it. I just stumbled onto something that others knew and were keeping secret from me, because I always hated the linear outline, right? An outline. It's like, I don't know what idea comes first. So I started sort of visually like, well, I know what the 7 chapters are. And then all of a sudden, oh, that really cool passage from the Tao Te Ching, that goes in chapter 6. And so just having this overhead view really helped me get the book out of here and onto the, and then I just wrote the chapters one at a time. I brought that first one into my office, I put it on the desk, opened a Word doc, and started writing the introduction and let those things kind of guide me. And as you can imagine, during the process, things moved around a little bit, but go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And yeah, I just wanted to mention this in passing. I've written a workbook. Oh, I said that at the top already, didn't I? So anyway, this is what it looks like. There's a sample on the table out there. No, you can't have that one. That's my sales sample, but it's a free PDF. Just go get it on peterbolland.com if you're curious about reading the book with a study guide. Even if you don't buy the book, take a look at the study guide, because it gives you a window in great detail into what the book does, and that might help you decide, is this for me, or maybe not so much. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Yeah, I'll just put that altar back up, and then I'll go ahead and open it up and take any, do we want to do some questions now, Swami? Okay, sure. So do you have any questions about the ideas or about the process, please? Oh, hang on a second.
We'll just get a microphone.
Oh, we need to do it on microphone because we are Zooming and we are recording. So with those audience members in mind, your question should be on a microphone. So anyway.
Yes. Is your mind map in the book?
No. Oh, sorry. I know. No, it is not. It is not. You would like to see that, wouldn't you? Yeah. You have to come over to my house, and I'll pull it out and share it with you. Maybe I should take better pictures of them and just put them on Facebook or something. But well, yeah.
Ventura's calling because I'm from Santa Barbara.
Oh, are you? I went. Beautiful, beautiful. Can we get a mic up here, please? It's hard to see you around the post. He was behind the post. Hi.
We do have a discussion group that are reading your book now.
Oh, really?
Yes. And
oh my gosh, thank you. Sorry?
We do have the workbook.
Oh, okay.
So it's going very well, except for, and I apologize because this question has to do with the chapter we haven't finished yet, meaning we're only halfway through the book.
That's fine. Why are you apologizing?
Well, because the question could be in the rest of that
chapter. Oh, okay, gotcha.
So I don't
Go on.
know that because I haven't gotten there, but the confusion that we had a big discussion about, and I'm here to represent the group, is that what is really, it's in the one about enjoyment, which I thought it's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
So our question or our misunderstanding is the difference between pleasure and joy seem to be, one is for everlasting and one is based on how you're feeling right now.
Yeah.
And then the third question is how does that fit in happiness? Where is that? Is that either joy or is that pleasure, or are we micromanaging this to the point where you're saying just forget it and enjoy it?
Just enjoying what? No, this is a great question. So let me dive into it a little bit. First of all, thank you and your whole group for doing that. That is so humbling to know that people are putting that much time into going through the work. It just means the world to me. I didn't know that was going to happen. I'm truly floored and so grateful. So that's a question that I get into right at the beginning of the chapter. What's the difference between pleasure and enjoyment? We'll get to happiness in a second. So one of the ways I start thinking about differentiating between them, and you and I can explore this further if you like. It seems to me, at least as a starting point, that pleasure is a response to an external stimuli of some kind. You eat a bowl of ice cream, it gives you pleasure. Or you hear a beautiful piece of music, it gives you pleasure. A nice massage, it gives you pleasure. And so the pleasure lasts as long as the experience, and maybe a little bit of a lingering thing. So that's my sense of pleasure. Isn't that how we kind of use the word? Whereas enjoyment or joy, as you already stated, seems to be a conscious state that is not a response to an immediate external stimuli, but rather a kind of a lasting mode of consciousness that is a little more mysterious to talk about where it comes from. So joy is longer lasting and not bound to a specific thing. But the words, and this is a language problem, isn't it? The words it's sort of like a Venn diagram. They overlap a lot. So in some senses, they're both like kind of the same. And in some senses, they're also a little different. And then the happiness piece is really a different thing altogether. And that it seems very connected to pleasure and enjoyment, because wouldn't we imagine that happiness is a state of some kind of enjoyment? So again, I don't want to sit here and make hard distinctions between them. Happiness is a kind of well-being. The ancient Greeks, like Aristotle, talk about eudaimonia, which we translate as happiness, but really means deep satisfaction. And again, which I would liken more toward joy, like when you complete a project, whether it's baking a cake or writing a book or whatever, and growing a beautiful garden, and the work is done, and you sit back and you have deep satisfaction, even though it was blood, sweat, and tears when you were doing it. And so that's when we feel most alive, when we have engaged with the work that is ours to do, and we have come to some sort of fruition that work is now born, and that gives us happiness. So, but I kind of feel happy when I'm opening a present. I didn't do anything. I'm just ripping paper off a box, and then you open the present, you're like, oh. But I was happy there for a moment, So this, it kind of goes back to what I was thinking about at the top, which is philosophy of this sort is an inquiry, and especially when it's done in dialogue with a group like you're experiencing, it really, maybe the fruit of that discussion is not perfect clarity about the distinctions between these terms and concepts. But we sure have a lot more clarity than we did before we began. And at least we're now alive to the question a little bit better. So I don't know if that gets you anywhere, but that's my thought as I hear you share that. It's wonderful. Yeah, all right. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bolland. I really enjoy your work and I appreciate it. My question is back in the beginning when you talked about religion, spirituality, and philosophy are healing modalities,
Yeah,
which is so powerful. Could you speak a little bit more about the comment you had on the slide where you can move past a place where questions and problems have power?
This is me kind of wrestling with that really rich challenge that idea of thinking about philosophy and spirituality as healing modalities. By the way, thank you for the promotion. I'm not Dr. Bolland, by the way. It's not important, but I don't have a PhD. I don't want to take credit from any of you who have one. I kind of petered out at master's degree, and I ran away from school after I got my master's. But anyway, there is that maybe wisdom means moving past the place where we're not answering all of our questions, but moving past the place where questions have power to disrupt us, to distort us. For some reason, it's leaping to mind that wonderful line from the Christian mystic Paul, the author of almost half the titles in the New Testament, the letters of Paul. About a third of them, scholars believe, are not written by him, but we're not going to bother with all the technicalities here. In one of his letters, Paul gives us a really memorable passage. He does this many times, but in this passage, he talks about when we come together in what he calls the inner Christ, the Christ within. You know, Paul's not talking about Jesus of Nazareth anymore, the man. He's talking about the Christ presence within us, a very Atman kind of idea, and if I may, and Paul says when we experience each other as the inner Christ, we experience, and this is the phrase that just is so beautiful, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. A peace that surpasses all understanding. So that means wisdom is not something I can logically and rationally explain. I can't think my way there. Maybe I don't have to read all the books except obviously this one. But maybe book learning and even this one and lectures and all that stuff, they are wonderful conveyors, like rafts that get us across the river, as Buddha analogizes. You know, Buddha says all of his teachings are like a raft that get you across the river. And when you get to the other side of the river, who carries the raft with them on their back? You know, nobody. So thinking and concepts and philosophical investigation, these are modalities that carry, healing modalities that carry us to a place where we then begin to experience directly, and now we can clothe it however we want: divinity, grace, tranquility, the peace that surpasses all understanding, nirvana, which means, of course, no wind, or moving past the place of the agitation that grips ordinary consciousness, namely craving and fear. Most of us are in constant craving and fear. Our modern word for it is anxiety. And when I wake up at 2 a.m, it's usually to worry about stuff, you know, for an hour or so. And so I love when the wisdom teachers like Paul remind us that that we may not be able to understand, but we can experience. And that's, I think, where I'm struggling to get in that passage. Thank you for that. Good.
Just going with what you're saying here, Flo, in the book, you referred to the kingdom of heaven.
Sure.
And you talked about how the kingdom of heaven has changed in the understanding, interpretation. I think you said it referred first to a physical kingdom, overthrowing the Roman rule and reestablishing the kingdom of Israel.
Yes.
Then you said it meant evolved into the afterlife, a place where we go and are obedient to church or truths of Christ. And then it evolved into something else. Can you talk about that last evolution you're talking about there?
Yeah, thank you. No, right. There are a couple things come to mind. You know, I was going back through the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible last summer, and it struck me, because I think about God ideas a lot, and what Campbell calls the masks of God, the way we conceptualize ultimate reality. And it struck me that, and we're bound to the Hebrew writings for this, how completely and thoroughly they conceptualized of God and the place where God lived in political terms. They projected, again in Campbell's sense, they projected onto the mystery of the cosmos a political consciousness of lords and serfs, that there's the sovereign Lord, and then we are the servants of that Lord. That's a political structure. And calling God Lord or King, and then talking about where he lives as a kingdom. So they're just looking around at their everyday experience, and there's King David and King Solomon, and they live in a monarchy, and they go, well, there's this other king up there called, you know, God. And so that's, again, a way of thinking about what is fundamentally ineffable or beyond all concepts. And so then when Jesus comes along as a good Jewish kid, he knows the Torah, he clearly quotes it off the top of his head, and he refers then to God's realm, or the divine realm, as the kingdom of heaven, and or the kingdom of God. And in those days, as the book points out, that was a common phrase in Israel at the time of Jesus, because they had been under Greek rule and then Roman rule for a couple of centuries, and living in an occupied country, as my family did in the Netherlands under Nazi rule for only 4 years. When you have another country marching up and down the streets of your country for a couple of centuries, you get a little sick of it, and you want your kingdom to be restored. So in the minds of many Jews, many of Jesus's contemporaries, the phrase the kingdom of God referred explicitly to a political entity. So Jesus, like all wisdom teachers, begins to make metaphors out of these things, and starts talking about the kingdom of God. And then a lot of people started thinking about it as a future event, and for good reason, because Jesus seems to frame it that way. When I return to establish the kingdom, and so on. But he says a few times that the kingdom of heaven, I think there's a passage in Luke and in the apocryphal scripture, the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you. What you look for has already come, Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas. Your Father's kingdom, he says, is scattered all over the earth, only you do not see it. So in biblical studies, that's called realized eschatology, if you care. It's that the end times are here. And I don't mean in terms of some apocalypse. I mean, what, apocalypse means to reveal. It doesn't mean Armageddon. Apocalypse means to reveal. It means all the illusions disappear, and we finally realize we have been in the kingdom all along. Buddhism has the same struggle, that it's not samsara versus nirvana. Samsara bad, nirvana good, must get out of samsara, must get to nirvana. That whole construct dissolves. That nirvana and samsara are two modes of consciousness for the exact same presence. So this is what has to change, and that is what strikes me. So that third meaning of the kingdom of heaven is as an internal realized state, as we talk about in Vedanta, of self-realization, or the realization of Brahman Atman, and the experience of Sat Chit Ananda, boundless being, boundless consciousness, boundless bliss.
The peace path, the peace through the virtue, peace.
That surpasses all understanding.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that in reference to the kingdom of heaven?
It seems to me that's a really good way of thinking about it. I would not be dogmatic about that. Doctrine and scripture are for me like trying to explain poetry or music, or as someone. I think Elvis Costello, the great 80s and 90s and still working singer-songwriter, said, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. I'm not sure what he means exactly, but I think that's the point. So all this scriptural exegesis that we're always doing is like trying to explain a Bob Dylan song. Kind of ruins it. And why don't we just listen to the song again and sit? So yeah, but it seems to me that wisdom teachers are pointing to a state of consciousness in which I am free from my ordinary agitations. And who doesn't want that, right? That's why everybody is medicating all the time. That's why cannabis and alcohol and media and screens and distractions are so eternally, prevalently popular. Y'all noticed how gambling has just taken over the world through sports? And now large corporate sports companies are now all gambling companies. And you'll see a lot of ads if you watch the Super Bowl tomorrow about gambling companies. It used to be sort of a secret thing, like you had to know a guy. Now it's just booking mainstream. So guess what's happening? Especially males, especially 25 to 32, are skyrocketing in gambling addiction. That's the unconsciousness of craving. I've had my own challenges with compulsive disorders in my life, so I'm not pointing any fingers. I'm okay now, but I feel bad for all these kids, who are just trying to get away from the anxiety of being 25 through 32, and finding the illusion of power and freedom in grotesque corporate AI manipulation of their consciousness. And so, anyway, don't get me started. Oh, too late. I already did. So do we have room for others, or are we transitioning, or? Oh, please, do we have one back here?
Is on.
Yes, thank you. Hi.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was amazing, your presentation, and thank you for writing the book.
Thank you.
And you might not consider yourself a specialist, but maybe the next step, I would like the next step for you to be the how-to.
The how-to.
And
Yeah.
the book, writing a book, basically, even though you say you're not a specialist,
Oh, how to write the book, not how to become enlightened.
yeah,
okay.
That would be
Yeah.
amazing.
So I got two books to write now.
But yeah, so that's what I wanted to suggest.
I appreciate that. Maybe I'll
Maybe a course.
maybe I'll put a talk together that I do a lot of talks at places like San Diego Oasis and other places. PeterBolland.com, the calendar page has all my upcoming stuff, and maybe I should put a little workshop together on how to get started writing a nonfiction book. I have a little imposter syndrome about that, but I have imposter syndrome about everything. So why would that be any different? But thank you for the encouragement, because I know a lot of folks have a book in them, right? And it's really super intimidating. I could talk about the whole self-publishing journey and just how much it costs, and just the whole thing. So I will take that to heart. Thank you for that request. Anybody else have really hard work for me to do that they want me to do?
So, one of my things when I came, one of my impulses as a human being is Peter referred to integration. So there's a concept called, in Sanskrit, samanvaya, harmony. It's creating harmony in groups, creating harmony in relationships, creating harmony within ideas. So we have a class that I'm part of, the chaplaincy class at UCSD. We're training to become chaplains. We have a few chaplains behind us who come from different traditions. We have Ellen from the Judaism tradition, and Andrea from the Christian tradition. Did Hannah come? Okay, Hannah's okay. All right. So I'm curious, because if you know anything about chaplaincy, you'll find when I'm hearing the stories of how they came into this field, you'll notice that they were doing something prior to becoming a hospital chaplain. So they were doing something, and we had a person who was working in a very wealthy corporate field. We have physicians, we have so they're doing some very highly successful field. Something in their life turned them away. And I want to, Ellen, if you would agree with this, Peter talked about, first of all, acceptance. It seems to me that first stage would be stop fighting what we're doing. We stop fighting maybe the dharma, the path that we're on. And we just come to terms that this isn't doing it for me. And in that acceptance, it seems like the next stage Peter talked about was surrender. And in surrender, we sort of deepen into that letting go. Now, Peter in his book mentions, he didn't really mention in his class, when we let go of the surface, of the waves, of all the, should I do this, should I not do this? This is what I want, this is what I don't want, of all the preferences, what we call the egoic mind. When we let go and start sinking into something, Peter talked about, we sink into more of a divine intelligence. Something else starts to awaken within us. And it's this, I think referred to it as some type of a divine intelligence, an intuition, the divine, God. Peter talked about God, the kingdom starts to awaken within. And then that starts to access kind of like as the third step, engagement. What is my path? What should I be doing that gives me the feeling of flow? Peter in his book talks about, in Buddhism, we talk about dukkha. Life is dukkha, means dis-ease. I'm always in uneasiness. And then when I find in Sanskrit, dharma, when I find my path, then there's less resistance, and I seem to go with the flow. This is what I was born to do. I don't know if you guys can share your thoughts about this, Ellen and Andrea, but it seems like
Bravo.
and as we go along in that, all of a sudden, the right action, all these things about engagement, what we call ananda, you're referring to kind of like happiness.
Yeah.
When all the resistance goes away, the intrinsic nature, we say, of who you are is joy. And that joy just brings up, it's not the opposite of, it's not happiness per se, because happiness has an equivalent to sadness, like good and bad, pleasure. And so there's something innate within you that you tap into, that peace that surpasses all, that just springs up with you. It's innate within you.
Yeah.
When the resistance, when all the coverings get removed.
Right.
And then you flow and you're at peace and you're joy. And I notice that with the chaplains sometimes. But we have to get to that stage because, as we all know, as being chaplains, we get burned out if our ego comes into play with the patients. We get burned out when we have expectations coming into your patient room and we're expecting things from them. We leave disappointed. We have to go face the next patient, and we're carrying all this energy with us from the previous patient. He talks about work with attachment, but work with detachment. How do you do that? And we talk about that in our chaplaincy, about the frustrations. What I discovered in our chaplaincy, we start to go into understand our own self-awareness. We come into a patient's room, we start to understand what are the biases that I have within me that I'm going to project onto the patient. For me, maybe sometimes if I meet a patient who's more fanatical, who's more of a fundamentalist, and then how do I react with that? Because as chaplains, we're trained to not project our own views. We're trained to enter into the person's domain, what their viewpoint is, and then help them in their viewpoint, help them in their paradigm towards getting a releasing of suffering. So you see each one of these windows, each one of these patients, each one of these paths we go into. The difficulties of being an interreligious chaplain is you have to learn to let go, keep your own stuff outside, and come in completely, as Peter was talking about, with clean eyes, with eyes, pure eyes, so that you can help the patient in the way that they need help. Making an assessment on what their needs are, not projecting what you think they need. And I find his book is very helpful. It's just, I find that he's taken these teachings and put them in such a simple way to read. That's what I find so beautiful.
You're hired.
But all this comes, it's not a one-shot deal, as we learn in chaplaincy. We go again and again, making mistakes in the patient's room. We get burned. We come out with tears, and then we go again, we try again. So what I find in all of this also, Peter, is that it has to be a concept of spirituality has to offer us resiliency.
Yeah.
Where is your support? When you're going through, Peter talked about, when you go through the sufferings, when you go through the pain, you become more vulnerable. You open up more. For me, the difficult part that I experience in the chaplaincy is I'm very much in my head. I'm a conceptual thinker, and my the classmates, but also my supervisors, sink into your heart. What is feel into what the patient is trying to tell you. Don't have preconceived, robotic answers.
Yeah.
Don't just play off one thing and then automatically go, okay, this word association, feeling association.
Right.
Sink into this for me was the most challenging, but the chaplains there, I find a lot of them, this is their innate, they're just really good at this. I'm so, I tell you when you guys are there, how it just flows in the way they do, how they just can go into a room, connect with the patient, start to have the patient open up, share the most intimate aspects of their life, you see the most, and then also it means that we have to be vulnerable also. If you're going to allow us in, we also have to allow you in. There is in Hinduism, there's a thing called darshan. When you go to a temple or a shrine, it's called seeing. You go to the temple, you see God. You know, we do worship, sometimes we feel the presence of God there. And darshan is not a one-way experience. Darshan is a two-way. Not only do you see the divine, but you have to feel that the divine is seeing you. What you're looking is real, it's come alive, this is shining. Do you feel that you're being seen? And that's all in these chaplaincies. The great chaplains are, they can make a person feel heard, feel seen, feel supported. And that's when we go back to, what do we want from God, the divine? What is all this about? It's to come back to our divine center, feel seen, feel supported, feel heard, so that sometimes when we surrender, we feel there's a presence there. And maybe as a companion who'll guide us, who'll be with us, to the challenges. Ultimately, till we see that, maybe Peter's talking about that when we feel there is no separation. Peter talks a lot about in his book that we think there's a separation between us and God, or us and others. And the whole obstacle is how to remove that sense of separation and just feel an overall connected oneness with everything. So I thank you, Peter. I mean, in everything you do, everything you share, when he sings, when he speaks, he really tries to create that harmony, that interconnectedness. And we feel, whenever I'm with him, I feel better about myself. So I feel good about myself.
Back at you.
So it's just, I think that's all we're asking here is to, what was called this spirituality. I think, Peter, you talked about in the beginning that it can't be given to another person, but there is a feeling of when you're with someone who is calm, who's at peace, you feel that presence within them. There's a saying that sometimes you go to a holy person, your problems don't get solved, but they get dissolved. They take you to a higher sense of a higher wavelength. And at that higher wavelength, all of a sudden the small little things that you're worrying about, they're no longer there. You just, the mind that's constantly in wave at 2 o'clock, we're waking up, being in that sense of that holy company, it just starts to make the mind feel at peace, and you feel at ease when you go back to sleep. So,
thank you,
Peter, thank you so much for this whole experience.
Thank you, family. Appreciate it. Bye-bye. Thank you.